Hi everyone, thanks for joining again today. The headline on a story in a recent edition of the Telegraph newspaper reads as follows. Royal College of GPs failed to declare conflict of interest over children's COVID vaccine. And in summary, let's say the Royal College of GPs did not reveal donation payments from Pfizer, Big Pharma Pfizer, when advocating for jabs for kids in the 12 to 15 age group. And this was while they were attending and taking part in crucial meetings, and that's according to campaigners. Now, I would say that's pretty damning on the face of it. But joining me now to discuss the story in depth with its wider implications is Molly Kingsley from UsForThem, which, for those that don't know, is a lobby group determined to keep children's rights and needs and health and wants in mind in the face of legislation that affects their lives. So thanks for being here today, Molly.
It's a pleasure, as always, Neil.
This story shocked me yet again, and I say that as one who's been shocked to the core more times than I can count in relation to the behaviour of elements of the establishment in the past 3 or 4 years. But the meat of this story, the substance of this story, is the product of efforts by UsForThem, is it not?
Yes, it is. So this came about because as you know, we've had a particular focus since 2020 on pandemic decision making. It is my view that there was no decision more shocking and perhaps even more unethical than that to roll out the COVID vaccine to children. The bit of context for this, just for your listeners, is that the originally in the UK, for those that don't remember this background, the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisations, had declined to recommend a mass COVID vaccine rollout to 12 to 15-year-olds. So they had recommended it in the end for 16 to 17-year-olds, not for younger age groups. And they had said simply there wasn't sufficient benefit to overrule the, risk of unknown but potentially significant harms. And I think many of us thought that was a very sensible decision. However, as you may remember, the chief medical officers, the 4 joint CMOs of the UK, the one CMO for England, of course, Chris Whitty, they took it upon themselves to effectively override that decision. So the JCVI allowed them the opportunity to review the decision. JCVI said, look, we have thought about this decision on clinical grounds, but if you want to look again at the decision, understanding, doubtless, although this was not said, understanding the huge political pressure at the time that there was to vaccinate children, if you want to look again at this and, look at wider societal factors, you can do that. And surprise, surprise, a few days later, the CMOs had a meeting. They consulted various expert bodies, of whom the Royal College of GPs, named in this story, were one. And after listening to the advice from those colleges and other experts, they decided to go ahead and authorise a mass vaccine rollout of children. And that decision, as you know, left many of us shell-shocked.
And, to get to the nub of it in terms of this most recent story, what was it that you were able to find out about the relationship between Pfizer, which at the time was the only big pharma company promoting a jab for children, and the Royal College of GPs, and the presence of money in that relationship?
Yeah, so what we did is we put in a Freedom of Information Act request to get hold of the minutes of the CMO's meetings, and actually they were meetings held over 3 days. So there were 3 different meetings. One of the meetings was with the Royal Colleges. So that tells you who was in the meeting. Now, as in all meetings, interested and potentially conflicted parties are meant to declare conflicts of interest. So, as a matter of corporate process, if you have a potential conflict of interest, you would be expected in a meeting in which that interest is relevant to declare it. Nothing controversial towards that. You would just expect it to happen. And in fact, there's an express statement in these minutes saying before any intervention, i.e. before a party speaks, they must declare their interest. And it was very notable that the Royal College, among others, the Royal College had spoken. They had given an unequivocal recommendation in favour of vaccinating children, and they hadn't declared any conflicts of interest. Now, one of the other work streams that we have been doing, and this has been an ongoing work stream for the best part of 2 years now, is looking into conflicts of interest in the pharmaceutical industry, and there are a lot of them. So we were aware, because we had researched some of this, and I'll come on to how you find this out in a second, but we were aware that a number of the Royal Colleges have taken significant amounts of money from Big Pharma in general, and in particular the vaccine manufacturers. And we knew that the Royal College of GPs had. The way you find this out is there is a database called the APBI database. It's the industry database, where some payments made by pharmaceutical companies to some organisations are searchable. Now, this in itself, and I don't know how far you want to get into this kind of worms because it's deep, but there are a few things to be said about this. First of all, this database is incredibly incomplete. So you can search and you can, in theory, find out money that has been given to healthcare organisations or to royal colleges or to organisations like the UK HSA. It might surprise some people to know that pharmaceutical companies do in fact give money to the MHRA, UK HSA, other UK regulatory bodies. What you can't do, because it's not on the database, there's no requirement, is you can't see what kind of money pharma has been giving to companies outside of healthcare. So, for example, if I wanted to search and find out, what money has the BBC or the Guardian taken from Pfizer, that wouldn't be on this database. But in this case, we could see the Royal College had taken money.
On the face of it, what was that money being paid by Pfizer to the Royal College of GPs for? What were Pfizer, on the face of it, expecting in return for whatever they were paying?
So we don't know. That's not required to be disclosed in the databases. I mean, what the Royal College of GPs and presumably Pfizer, in fact, I think they did say this, what they would say is, well, don't worry, these are relatively small sums in the scheme of things. That's what they might say. We would argue about that. And actually, just for clarification, the sums we're talking about, I think there was £50,000 in 2020 and a further 100,000 in 2021, which was a year of this very ethically contentious decision to go ahead and jab kids. Now, obviously, not necessarily all of that 100,000 would have been taken at the time of the meeting, but it can be assumed that it was known that there was an ongoing financial relationship with Pfizer. But they would say it's not relevant. It's taken for other things. It doesn't have any direct bearing on the decision. And you hear that kind of justification all the time in these cases. And I think the answer to that, just as a common sense point of view, you will know, Neil, if you take money from someone, of course it affects what you say. It's effectively a form of censorship, isn't it? Because you might not go as far as actively promoting the same causes as your funder. There is, in this case, they did, of course. They actively said that kids should get the Pfizer vaccine, so they did go that far. But even when they don't go that far, you know that if you've taken money, you're very unlikely to criticise someone that's taken money. And I think what we have seen across the whole, I would say, of the public health sphere is we have bodies that might have been expected to speak out about concerns about the vaccine rollout who have been effectively censored through taking money. And, this is one example. There are so many, I don't know how much time you have, but there are so many other examples of institutions, including a lot of the other royal colleges, who have taken money and have come out with very strong statements in favour of the products, particularly the vaccines of the people they've taken money from.
In the context of a subject that was so contentious at the time, in a COVID era that was so febrile, so many strongly held opinions, in a world of freedom of information requests being a reality, in a world of independent media snuffling around in the undergrowth looking for backstory, what does it say about, say, a body like the Royal College of GPs, that they wouldn't simply, even if it was innocent, simply declare in an offhand way. Now, of course, we have, received a certain amount of, financial support from Pfizer. Just get it out there, because surely there must have been someone with the wit to think, we've taken X amount of money from this company and someone somewhere is going to throw that in our faces. And if it's left to somebody else, it won't look good.
It's incredible, isn't it? And I had exactly the same thought, Neil. What is going through people's minds? And I can only think it's one of two things. So the first is that they simply don't see it as a conflict. And, you have to acknowledge that that is a possibility. We're talking about institutions, not individuals. I think that's an important point. So it is quite possible that the people sitting in that meeting did not know that the money had been taken. I find that slightly tenuous when you're talking about quite significant amounts of money and quite senior people. You make it your business, don't you? If you know you're talking about the rollout of a Pfizer vaccine to children, you would have hoped that someone in that meeting, understanding, as you said, that the meeting notes are likely to be crawled over in later years, and the COVID inquiry, of course, you would hope they would have thought to at least ask the question. Or they simply don't care. And I'm not saying that's what happened here, but I think we do have examples of organisations for whom it simply is not tenable to say they didn't know they'd taken money. Let me give you an example to frame this. So Imperial College London. Now, Imperial College were incredibly important during the entire pandemic, but in particular important because it was from Imperial College that Neil Ferguson, remember him? That Neil Ferguson sprung. And Neil Ferguson wrote this incredibly pivotal paper, effectively saying we're going to need to have an intensive package of interventions and lockdowns until a vaccine becomes available. Oh, and by the way, guys, that could be at least 18 months. I mean, this is what the paper that he authored said. And that was, as I said, a pivotal paper. It effectively set not only the tone for the UK lockdown response, but the entire global pandemic response. Imperial College in the months leading up to the publication of that paper had taken £22.5 million from the UK government for vaccine R&D. And in the year leading up to the authoring of that paper, they'd taken over 100 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as many of your viewers will know, is a philanthropic organisation intimately connected with the vaccine industry. Now, nowhere was that very, very significant. What's that, 130 million odd of money? Like, there's no way that's not a very material financial donation and potentially conflict. There is not a mention of that. This is what I mean about this. I find it, I cannot assess it. Naivety, stupidity, hubris, I don't know. But it's there. This blindness towards the fact that people will come across this information eventually, whether you declare it or not, because that's the world in which we live. And you mentioned Imperial College London and Neil Ferguson and Bill and Melinda Gates and Gavi and all of the rest of it. And that was that college was the origin point, ground zero for that paper that said that the vaccine saved millions of lives, which was authored by Azra Ghani and a team. And that went out there, and that went everywhere. Every MP, every pro-vaccine person ever after has quoted "saved millions of lives," and it was quickly jumped upon as being mathematical modelling, not based on real-world data, really little more than an opinion piece. Yeah.
And it was coming out of an organ that was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, by Gavi, and it was the lead author was Azra Ghani, who had been pro-lockdown, pro-jab, pro-fear, pro-propaganda from the get-go.
Yeah, but you're the conspiracy theorist for sharing that.
And yet, and when these things come to light, there's the knee-jerk response from the bodies concerned seems to be almost, how dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you question what we do?
I think that's right. And I think it is an industry that has become unchallengeable because of its huge financial largesse. And, the thing that strikes me about this, so there was a select committee on the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, the last select committee, rather shockingly, was in 2005, 20 years ago now. And it was eviscerating of the industry's huge financial wealth, its power to corrupt, the fact that it didn't use the word corrupt, but, you know, is what this select committee was effectively getting at. And yet we've had nothing. And if anything, it's got worse. And obviously we had the pandemic, which was just such a pivotal moment. And what I don't understand is how we are in the position where those of us with no conflicts, no ties to the financial industry are arguing from the moral low ground. Like, that makes no sense to me at all. Like, it should be for these people to defend the fact that they can give independent and impartial advice. It shouldn't be for us to do anything more than point out there is a conflict. It's very, very notable, Neil, that the COVID inquiry doesn't seem to be getting into this. So I think they are in their last chance saloon now. They have the module 4, the vaccine module. If they don't get into the conflicts issues in this module, and they haven't in modules 1, 2 or 3, if they don't get into it in this one, they won't. And to my mind, that simple fact alone invalidates the entirety of the COVID inquiry's findings, because, well, maybe not the entirety, but, you know, it will invalidate its core findings about a lot of these issues, because how can you assess, you know, lockdown interventions, the response in the health service, all that kind of thing, without understanding the very conflicted nature of the context?